Imagine this. You're a broke 24-year-old hustling in the heart of Seoul, juggling dead-end jobs just to keep the lights on. Your mom's sick back home, bills are piling up like skyscrapers, and all you crave is one solid gig to turn things around. No drama, no fairy tales, just honest work. But fate? It's got other plans. One stormy night, you land a spot at this swanky barbecue joint, thinking it's your big break. Little do you know, it's owned by the most dangerous man in the city, a mafia kingpin who rules the shadows with an iron fist and a silver tongue. Fast forward, a spilled drink, a wrong turn, and suddenly you're not just serving tables, you're sitting at his table. The boss himself. Eyes like daggers, secrets thicker than gochujang sauce. He looks at you, really looks, and in that moment your simple life explodes into a whirlwind of forbidden alliances, high-stakes chases, and a romance that could get you killed. Will you run? Or will you play the game and claim the empire? Hey everyone, drop a comment below. Where are you watching from right now? Seoul, New York, or somewhere else? And quick question. If you accidentally ended up at a mafia boss's table, would you bolt out the door or hear him out? Let me know. Your answers might inspire the next twist. The alarm shrieked at 5:47 a.m., 3 minutes before Sumin Kang had set it, but her hand was already reaching to silence the sound. Sleep was a luxury she couldn't afford to indulge in, not when the day stretched ahead like an obstacle course designed specifically to break her spirit. She rolled off the thin mattress on the floor of her studio apartment in Sindangdong, a neighborhood where the buildings leaned together like exhausted commuters on the subway, and the smell of kimchi jjigae perpetually hung in the stairwells. At 24, Sumin had the kind of determination that showed in the set of her jaw and the permanent crease between her eyebrows. Her face was pretty in that understated way, soft features that hadn't quite hardened despite everything life had thrown at her, dark eyes that still held sparks of hope even when exhaustion dulled them. She tied her hair back with practiced efficiency, splashed cold water on her face because the hot water heater had broken weeks ago, and pulled on the cafe uniform that smelled faintly of coffee grounds no matter how many times she washed it. The mirror showed her what Seoul saw every day, another young woman fighting to stay afloat in a city that chewed up dreams and spat out debt. But Sumin had learned not to see herself through Seoul's eyes. She had a mantra, whispered under her breath as she laced up her worn sneakers. Just work. Just work. Just work. Her father's death 3 years ago had left a crater in their family that no amount of time could fill. He'd been a factory worker in Ulsan, honest and hardworking, the kind of man who believed that integrity and effort would eventually pay off. A workplace accident, the details still murky, wrapped in corporate speak and rushed settlements, had taken him before his 50th birthday. The compensation barely covered the funeral. Now her mother lived alone in that same coastal city, her lungs growing weaker each month from an illness the doctors couldn't quite pin down, treatment costs climbing higher than Sumin could calculate without feeling sick. The morning shift at Café Mano in Gangnam started at 7. Sumin made it with 2 minutes to spare, her cheeks flushed from sprinting through the pre-dawn streets. The cafe catered to the early morning crowd, executives grabbing Americanos before heading to their glass towers, university students cramming for exams over overpriced lattes. She smiled mechanically, took orders, steamed milk until her hands ached, and cleaned tables with meticulous care. By noon her feet throbbed in her shoes. The afternoon brought tutoring sessions. 3 middle school students whose parents paid her under the table to help with English. She met them at a library in Apgujeong, drilling vocabulary and grammar while her stomach growled, surviving on convenience store kimbap that she ate standing up between sessions. By 6 p.m. she was racing across the city on her battered scooter, dodging taxis and buses, to start her evening delivery job for a chicken restaurant in Mapogu. This was life. This was survival. And Sumin told herself it was enough, that if she just kept working, kept pushing, eventually the math would work out. Eventually she'd save enough to bring her mother to Seoul for better treatment. Eventually she'd find something more stable, more sustainable. But Seoul had other plans. The job posting appeared on her phone at 11:37 p.m. on a Thursday, just as she collapsed onto her mattress after 14 hours of non-stop hustle. Phoenix Grill server position Hongdae, competitive pay plus tips, immediate start. The hourly rate made her sit up straight. It was nearly double what the cafe paid. She submitted her application before she could second-guess herself, then fell into a dreamless sleep. The response came the next morning. An interview was scheduled for that same evening. Phoenix Grill sat on a quieter street in Hongdae, away from the pulsing clubs and street art that made the neighborhood famous. The exterior was understated, dark wood, subtle signage in elegant Hangul and English, windows tinted just enough to suggest exclusivity. Sumin arrived 15 minutes early, her best blouse pressed, resume printed on paper that had cost her 3,000 won at the print shop. The woman who interviewed her was polished and efficient, her nameplate reading Manager Yoon. She asked standard questions: previous experience, availability, why she wanted the position. Sumin answered honestly. She was a hard worker, she needed the money, and she'd never missed a shift in her life. Manager Yoon studied her for a long moment, then smiled thinly. "We have particular standards here at Phoenix Grill," she said. "Our clientele expects discretion, professionalism, and absolute reliability. Can you provide that?" "Yes," Sumin said without hesitation. "Good. You start tomorrow. Lunch shift, 11 to 4. Uniform will be provided. Don't be late." The first week passed in a blur of learning. Table numbers, menu items, the proper way to grill galbi at tableside, how to pour soju with 2 hands in the traditional manner. Phoenix Grill was unlike anywhere Sumin had worked before. The decor was expensive but tasteful. Low lighting, private booths separated by carved screens, staff who moved with choreographed precision. The clientele was equally distinctive. Well-dressed men who spoke in low voices, women in designer handbags who barely touched their food, occasional groups that felt more like business meetings than social gatherings. Tips were generous. The other servers were friendly but reserved, and Sumin noticed they all shared a certain quality. They knew when not to ask questions. She might have wondered more about the restaurant's unusual atmosphere if she hadn't been so relieved by the steady paycheck. For the first time in months, she could send money home without calculating down to the last one whether she could afford to eat that day. Her mother's voice on the phone sounded stronger, brighter. "You found something good?" she'd asked, and Sumin had said yes, it was good, it was very good. She had no idea. The lunch rush on her third Tuesday was particularly intense. Every table filled, the kitchen running hot, servers weaving through the dining room with practiced grace. Sumin balanced a tray loaded with banchan, the small dishes of kimchi, seasoned vegetables, and pickles that accompanied every meal, when someone at table 7 shifted suddenly. She pivoted to avoid a collision, but momentum betrayed her. The small dish of gochujang sauce tipped, tumbling in slow motion, and splattered across the floor 6 inches from a booth she'd been specifically told never to disturb. The back booth. Always reserved. Always occupied by the same group of men at precisely 1:15 p.m. every Tuesday and Thursday. Her heart stopped. Manager Yoon's words echoed, "Table 12 is priority. Do not approach unless summoned. Do not make eye contact. Do not, under any circumstances, cause a disturbance." She just caused a disturbance. The sauce spread across the polished floor like blood, deep red and glistening. Sumin dropped to her knees instantly, cloth in hand, wiping with frantic efficiency. She kept her eyes down, focusing only on the mess, her pulse hammering in her ears. She was aware of the silence that had fallen over nearby tables, the weight of attention pressing down on her. "You missed a spot." The voice was low, measured, with an undertone of amusement that somehow made it more unsettling. Sumin froze, her cloth hovering over the last smear of sauce. Slowly, against every instinct screaming at her to keep her head down, she looked up. The man watching her was perhaps 40, though his face had that timeless quality that came from either excellent genetics or expensive skincare, or both. Sharp features, dark eyes that assessed her with unnerving intensity, hair styled back in a way that was both classic and modern. He wore a suit that probably cost more than 3 months of her rent, charcoal gray with subtle pinstripes, the kind of tailoring that whispered wealth rather than shouting it. Minjun Baek. Though she didn't know his name yet. "I'm so sorry," Sumin managed, her voice steadier than she felt. "I'll have this cleaned immediately." "You're new," he interrupted. "Not a question. A statement." 3 weeks, sir." His lips curved slightly. Not quite a smile. "Stand up." She obeyed, still clutching the cloth, acutely aware of the sauce staining her apron, of the 3 other men seated in the booth watching her with expressions she couldn't read. Minjun gestured to the empty space beside him. "Sit." Every instinct told her this was wrong. Servers didn't sit with customers. Especially not at table 12. But something in his tone made it clear this wasn't a request. Sumin slid into the booth, perched on the edge ready to bolt. Up close, she could see details. The subtle scent of his cologne, expensive and woodsy, the way his suit jacket fell perfectly across his shoulders, the signet ring on his right hand with an engraving she couldn't make out. And his eyes. They held her captive, reading her with the precision of someone who made his living understanding people's weaknesses. "What's your name?" he asked. "Sumin, Sumin Kong." "Sumin," he repeated as if testing how it felt in his mouth. "You work hard. I've noticed." She hadn't realized he'd noticed anything. She'd been careful to stay invisible. "Thank you, sir," she said carefully. "Why Phoenix Grill?" His fingers drummed once on the table, a lazy, controlled gesture. "You could work anywhere. The pay is good. Honest." He seemed pleased by this. Most people would have said they loved fine dining or some nonsense. "You're here for money." "I'm here to work," she corrected gently, then immediately regretted the correction. Who was she to push back against a customer? But Minjun laughed, a genuine sound that transformed his face for a moment into something almost boyish. The other men at the table shifted, exchanging glances. Clearly this was unexpected. "Just to work," he echoed. "Refreshing." He leaned back, still watching her. "Tell me, Sumin, who's just here to work, what would you do if you discovered your workplace wasn't quite what it seemed?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Sumin felt something cold slide down her spine. Instinct, maybe, or the universe trying to warn her. She met his gaze steadily. "I'd decide if the work was still worth doing," she said. For a long moment, Minjun simply stared at her. Then he nodded, once as if she'd passed some test she hadn't known she was taking. "Go back to work, Sumin Kong," he said, waving a dismissive hand. "But remember, we'll talk again." She stood, bowed quickly, and fled to the kitchen. Her hands were shaking as she disposed of the cloth. Manager Yoon found her there, eyes wide with something that looked like fear. "What did he say to you?" she demanded. "Nothing," Sumin lied. "He just told me to be more careful." Manager Yoon studied her for a long moment, then sighed. "Stay alert." "And Sumin? Whatever you think you saw or heard at that table, forget it." But Sumin knew, with the certainty of someone standing at the edge of a cliff, that forgetting was no longer an option. She'd been noticed by Minjun Baek, and though she didn't yet know who he truly was, every instinct told her that her simple life, her safe life of just working, just surviving, had just become infinitely more complicated. The Phantom had chosen to see her. And in the shadows of Seoul's underworld, being seen was the most dangerous thing that could happen. The shift in Sumin's routine was subtle at first, so gradual that she almost convinced herself she was imagining it. But working people develop sharp instincts about patterns, about the small deviations that signal change, and Sumin had been working long enough to know when something was off. It started with the seating arrangements. Manager Yoon began assigning her to the back section with increasing frequency, the area that housed table 12 and the other booths where serious men conducted serious business over barely touched plates of bulgogi. Sumin would arrive for her shift and find her station assignment changed, always pulling her closer to that back booth, to Minjun's orbit. He was there every Tuesday and Thursday like clockwork, 1:15 p.m. precisely. But now increasingly he appeared on other days too. Mondays for breakfast meetings. Wednesday evenings. Once on a Saturday late, when the restaurant should have been closed but somehow wasn't. And every time without fail he would request her service. Table 12 requests Sumin became a refrain she heard multiple times a week. At first, the interactions were brief and professional. She'd take his order, always the same, samgyeopsal with extra garlic, a bottle of their most expensive soju that he barely touched, and retreat. But gradually he began asking questions. Small things, seemingly innocuous. "How long have you lived in Seoul?" "For years, sir." "Family?" "Just my mother. In Ulsan." "She's sick, isn't she?" That had made Sumin's blood run cold. How did he know? She'd never mentioned it at work, had been careful to keep her personal struggles private. But Minjun had simply smiled at her expression, that enigmatic curve of lips that revealed nothing while suggesting everything. "You work 3 jobs, he'd continued. "No one does that unless they're desperate. Medical bills?" "That's personal, sir. Call me Minjun." He'd leaned forward then, elbows on the table, his full attention focused on her in a way that made her feel simultaneously visible and vulnerable. "And you're right, it is personal. But I make it my business to know the people around me, Sumin. Especially the interesting ones." She should have been offended. Should have reported the invasive questions to Manager Yoon. Instead, she'd felt something else entirely, a strange flutter of significance, of being seen not as a servant or a means to an end, but as a person worthy of curiosity. It was intoxicating and terrifying in equal measure. The envelope appeared in her locker 3 days later. No name, no note, just a thick stack of cash and crisp bills. Sumin counted it with shaking hands. 5 million won. Enough to cover 2 months of her mother's treatment, her rent, and still have some left over. She stood in the cramped break room, staring at the money as if it might bite her, her mind racing through possibilities. A mistake. Someone else's tip. A test. Or a gift. From him. She should have refused it. Should have brought it to Manager Yoon, insisted on finding its rightful owner. Instead, Sumin tucked the envelope into her bag, went home, and transferred the money to her mother's hospital account that same night. Her mother called the next morning, crying with relief, talking about how the doctors could finally start the new treatment they'd been recommending, and Sumin listened with her stomach in knots, knowing she'd crossed a line she didn't fully understand. "Where did you get this money?" her mother had asked. "A bonus," Sumin had lied. "For good performance." The lies were beginning already. 2 weeks later, she stayed late to help with inventory, organizing stockroom shelves in the quiet hours after closing. The restaurant had emptied out by midnight, just staff cleaning and resetting for the next day. Sumin was reaching for a box of expensive napkins on a high shelf when she heard voices, low, tense, speaking in rapid-fire Korean punctuated by English words that sounded like code. "The shipment from Incheon arrives Thursday. Usual location." "What about the Serpents?" "They've been pushing into Mapo." "Let them push. We'll push back harder." "And the payment to the Namsan precinct?" "Handled. We own that captain now." Sumin froze, her hands still reaching for the napkins, her breathing shallow. The voices were coming from the direction of the kitchen, but there was something else, a faint light seeping from beneath what she'd always assumed was a utility closet door. She climbed down from the step stool, every instinct screaming at her to leave, to walk away, to maintain plausible deniability. But curiosity has its own gravity. She crept closer, following the thin line of light. The door was slightly ajar. Through the gap, she could see stairs descending into a space that shouldn't exist. Phoenix Grill was a street-level establishment. There shouldn't be a basement. A hand clamped over her mouth before she could gasp. She was spun around, pressed against the wall, Minjun's face inches from hers. His expression was cold now, the charming veneer stripped away to reveal something harder underneath. "You shouldn't be here," he said quietly. She couldn't respond with his hand muffling her. Her heart hammered so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. This was it, the moment where curiosity got you killed, where asking the wrong questions or being in the wrong place meant disappearing into the Han River wrapped in plastic. But instead of violence, Minjun studied her eyes for a long moment, then slowly removed his hand. "If you scream, this ends badly for both of us. Understand?" Sumin nodded. Her voice came out as a whisper. "What is this place?" "You're a smart woman," Minjun said. "You've been here long enough. You've seen the clientele, heard the conversations. What do you think this place is?" "A restaurant," she said, though they both knew it was a lie. "Among other things." He stepped back, creating space, though his presence still dominated the narrow hallway. Phoenix Grill is a legitimate business. But it's also a hub. For people who conduct business outside traditional channels. "You mean illegal business?" "I mean business that operates in the spaces between laws." His eyes never left hers. "I run an organization, Sumin. We provide protection, facilitate transactions, maintain order in territories the police have abandoned. Some call it crime. I call it survival in a city that's forgotten how to take care of its own people." "You're a gangster," she said flatly. He smiled at that, a genuine expression of appreciation. "I'm the head of the Crimson Dragons. And yes, if you prefer crude terms, I'm a gangster. They call me the Phantom in certain circles. I'm there, I'm real, but good luck proving it in court." Sumin should have run. Every cell in her body screamed at her to run. But something rooted her in place. Maybe shock, maybe the strange magnetism Minjun exerted, maybe the terrible realization that she'd already accepted his money and therefore already become complicit. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. "Because you were going to find out anyway. You're too observant, too persistent. And because..." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "I want you to understand the truth. You've been working here for 6 weeks. In that time, you've proven yourself reliable, discreet, and remarkably unflappable. Those are valuable qualities. I'm just a server. No one is ever just anything, Sumin." He moved closer again, his voice dropping to something almost intimate. "You work 3 jobs to save your mother. You sacrifice everything for family. You understand loyalty, obligation, survival. Those aren't the qualities of just a server. Those are the qualities of someone who could be much more. I don't want to be part of," she gestured vaguely at the hidden basement door, "whatever this is. You already are." The words were gentle but final. The money I gave you? That came from accounts the government would love to trace. By accepting it, by using it, you've already stepped into this world. You can pretend you haven't, but the reality doesn't change. Rage flared in Sumin's chest, at him for the trap, at herself for walking into it. That's not fair. I didn't know. Life isn't fair, Minjun interrupted. You know that better than most. Your father died because some corporation valued profit over safety. Your mother is sick because healthcare is a luxury, not a right. You work yourself to exhaustion because the system is designed to keep people like you desperate. I'm not offering you fairness, Sumin. I'm offering you a choice. Keep struggling in a rigged game, or learn to play by different rules. Rules where people get hurt. People are already getting hurt, he countered. At least in my world there's honesty about it. And protection for those who earn it. He extended his hand toward the basement door. Come. Let me show you what you've stumbled into. Then you can make an informed decision. Every rational thought told her to refuse. But Sumin had learned long ago that rationality was a luxury, and she'd already made her choice the moment she'd deposited that money in her mother's account. She took a breath, then walked toward the stairs. The basement was larger than should have been possible, stretching beyond Phoenix Grill's footprint into neighboring buildings through cleverly concealed passages. It was organized chaos. One area dedicated to what looked like accounting, men in shirt sleeves working over ledgers and computers, another section that resembled a security center with multiple monitors showing street views throughout Hongdae and beyond. In a far corner, she glimpsed what could only be weapons storage, carefully locked but unmistakable. Minjun guided her through with a hand on her lower back, possessive, protective, proprietary. Men nodded respectfully to him, cast curious glances at her. She felt their assessment, their judgment, wondering who she was and why she raided the boss's personal tour. This is the nerve center of Crimson Dragon's operations in Western Seoul, Minjun explained, his voice taking on a lecturing quality, almost professorial. We run protection for over 300 businesses in Hongdae, Mapo, and Siademan. We facilitate imports that avoid excessive taxation. We provide conflict resolution when the courts are too slow or too corrupt to help ordinary people. Yes, it operates outside the law. But the law has failed these neighborhoods, Sumin. We fill the vacuum. You make it sound noble, she said quietly. It's survival, he corrected. Not noble. But not entirely evil either. The world isn't black and white, whatever they taught you. He brought her to a small office off the main floor. His private space, she realized, seeing the personal touches. A photograph on the desk of an older woman, perhaps his mother. Books in Korean and English about philosophy, strategy, economics. A window that looked out onto a fake view, a light box showing a beach scene that existed nowhere in Seoul. Sit, he said, gesturing to a chair across from his desk. When she complied, he poured 2 glasses of water from a bottle, handed her one. You have questions? Ask them. Why me? The question burst out before she could stop it. You could have anyone. Why tell me all this? Minjun leaned against his desk, arms crossed, studying her in that intense way that made her feel transparent. Because you remind me of someone, he said finally. I started where you are, desperate, ambitious, willing to work myself to death for a chance at something better. I know what it's like to be invisible, to watch the world from the outside. And I recognize potential when I see it. Potential for what? I don't know yet, he admitted. But I find myself wanting to find out. He moved closer, crouching so they were eye level. You can leave right now. Walk up those stairs, never come back to Phoenix Grill, forget everything you've seen. I'll make sure you get your final paycheck plus a severance. You'll be safe. Or you stay. You keep working upstairs, keep being the excellent server you are. But you also learn what happens down here. You meet the people, understand the operations. You let me show you a different kind of life. One where you're not constantly on the edge of financial ruin, where your mother gets the best treatment money can buy, where you have agency instead of just surviving. And what do you get out of it? Sumin asked, though she thought she knew the answer. Minjun smiled, reaching out to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear, a gesture so casual yet so charged that it sent electricity down her spine. Maybe I'm curious too. Maybe I want to see what happens when Sumin Kong stops just working and starts actually living. Maybe, his voice dropped lower, I just like the way you look at me. Like I'm a person, not a monster or a god. It's refreshing. The air between them felt heavy, loaded with possibility and danger. Sumin's normal life, the one where she worked herself to exhaustion but maintained her morals, her integrity, her clean conscience, hovered at the edge of a cliff. One step forward and it would plummet into darkness. One step back and she'd never know what lay on the other side. She thought of her mother, laughing on the phone about finally starting the new treatment. She thought of her threadbare apartment, the way her body ached every night from too much labor and too little rest. She thought of her father, who'd played by all the rules and died broken anyway. "If I stay," she said slowly, "I need to know the truth about something. My father worked at Tae-sung Manufacturing in Ulsan. There was an accident 3 years ago. The company said it was mechanical failure, but the investigation was closed too quickly. Did your organization have anything to do with that factory?" Minjun's expression shifted, surprise then respect. "Smart question. And I'll give you an honest answer, I don't know. But I can find out. The Crimson Dragons have connections in Ulsan. If there's a truth to uncover about your father's death, I'll help you uncover it." It should have been her answer. Walk away, demand nothing from him, maintain her independence. Instead, Sumin found herself nodding. "Okay, I'll stay. For now." "For now," Minjun agreed, though his smile suggested he thought it would become more permanent. He stood, extended his hand formally. "Welcome to the shadows, Sumin Kong. Try not to get lost." She shook his hand, feeling the calluses that suggested he'd worked with more than just words and money in his rise to power, and thought, "I'm already lost. The question is whether I'll find something worth finding in the darkness." As they walked back up the stairs, leaving the underground nerve center behind, Sumin glanced back once at the hidden world beneath the restaurant. The door closed behind them with a soft click, and she returned to the dining room where chairs sat appended on tables, the morning light just starting to gray the windows. Her phone buzzed. A text from her mother, a selfie from her hospital bed, smiling for the first time in months, the new 4 medication visible in the background. "Thank you for the money, my daughter. You're saving my life." Sumin closed her eyes, feeling the weight of choices and consequences settle on her shoulders like a physical burden. Just work, she'd promised herself. Just honest work. But honesty was a luxury in Seoul, and work came in many forms. She hadn't meant to fall into the Mafia's world. She just wanted to save her mother, to survive another day in this merciless city. How quickly noble intentions paved roads to very dark places. Minjun watched her from across the room, his expression unreadable in the dim light, and Sumin understood with crystalline clarity, she'd been recruited. Not violently, not through threats, but through the most effective method possible, through her own desperation and his careful understanding of what motivated her. He'd played her expertly and she'd let him because the alternative was watching her mother die. The game had begun. And Sumin was no longer a spectator. The transformation happened in increments so small that Sumin could almost lie to herself about how far she'd fallen, or risen depending on perspective. For the first 2 weeks after her basement revelation, nothing changed above ground. She served tables, smiled at customers, collected tips. The perfect server. The invisible woman. But below, in those hidden hours after closing or during her mysteriously extended breaks, she learned. Minjun became her guide into the underworld's architecture. He taught her to read the restaurant's real business, how certain customers signaled needs through specific orders, how table placement indicated hierarchy, how the timing of meals corresponded to business cycles she'd never imagined. A 2 p.m. Tuesday meeting meant money laundering discussions. Evening appointments on Fridays involved territorial negotiations. Late-night gatherings were for the Messier business, the kind that required alibis and discretion. "Information is currency," Minjun explained one night, the two of them alone in his basement office, papers spread between them like maps of an invisible empire. Know who sits where, who arrives together, who avoids each other. Understand the relationships and you understand the power. He sat close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him, could catch that expensive cologne mixed with something earthier, the scent of a man who worked with his hands when necessary. They'd fallen into an easy rhythm, these late-night tutorials, and Sumin found herself drawn not just to the knowledge but to him. The way his eyes lit up when explaining strategy. How his usual cold calculations softened when they were alone. The rare, genuine laughs she could coax from him with her surprisingly dry observations about the restaurant's more ridiculous customers. It was dangerous, this growing comfort. She knew it. But knowing and resisting were different animals. The first task came on a rainy Thursday. Minjun handed her a plain manila envelope, sealed and unmarked. "Deliver this to the address written inside," he said. "Hand it directly to the man who answers the door. Don't open it. Don't ask questions. Just complete the delivery and come back." Sumin held the envelope, feeling its weight. Papers, she guessed, nothing heavy or suspicious. What if I'm stopped? You won't be. You're just a woman running an errand. Police look for obvious criminals. You don't look like one. His hand covered hers briefly. Trust me. The address led her to a restaurant supply warehouse in Yangdongpo, the kind of industrial area where cameras were sparse and questions were discouraged. A middle-aged man with tired eyes accepted the envelope, nodded once and closed the door. The entire exchange took 30 seconds. Sumin rode the subway back to Hongdae with her heart in her throat, expecting police to materialize at any moment, to demand explanations she couldn't give. But nothing happened. She was invisible again, just another woman on public transport, and wasn't that the point? Criminals hid in plain sight, disguised as ordinary people living ordinary lives. When she returned to Phoenix Grill, Minjun was waiting with approval in his eyes and an envelope of cash that made her server wages look like pocket change. You did well, he said simply. Same time next week? She should have said no. Should have taken her regular paycheck and walked away from the extra work, the compromised morality, the creeping normalization of crime. Instead, Sumin found herself nodding. Same time. The deliveries continued. Envelopes, small packages, occasionally flash drives or phones. She never opened them, never asked their contents, maintained plausible deniability even to herself. The money accumulated. Her mother's health improved. She moved from her shoebox apartment to a modest but clean one-bedroom in a better neighborhood. Bought new clothes. Started eating regular meals instead of convenience store kimbap. Is this selling your soul? She asked herself in quiet moments. Or is this just navigating reality? Minjun's attention intensified. He requested her presence at more meetings, though she remained an observer, silent and decorative. But she listened, absorbed, learned. She discovered the Crimson Dragons operated with surprising sophistication. Less random violence, more strategic influence. They'd infiltrated police departments, had judges on payroll, controlled supply chains for everything from produce to prescription drugs. It was corporate crime dressed in gangster aesthetics, and Minjun ran it like a CEO who occasionally had to order executions. The attraction building between them was undeniable now. Small touches that lingered too long. Eye contact that communicated more than words. Late nights in his office where they talk about everything except what was happening between them, her childhood, his rise to power, philosophy, dreams, fears. He told her about growing up in poverty in Daegu, watching his father drink himself to death, vowing never to be powerless again. I'm not a good man, he said once, whiskey in hand, vulnerability cracking his usual armor. I've done things that would horrify you. But I've also built something real, protected people who had no other protection. Does that balance out? I don't know. But it's the life I chose. We all do terrible things to survive, Sumin replied softly. The question is whether we can live with ourselves after. Can you? He turned those intense eyes on her. Live with yourself? With what you're becoming. She wanted to say yes with conviction. Instead she said, I'm trying. He kissed her that night, or she kissed him, the initiation so mutual it was impossible to assign credit. It started soft, tentative, two people testing boundaries, then deepened into something hungry and desperate. They pulled apart gasping, foreheads pressed together, both understanding they'd crossed another line that couldn't be uncrossed. This is a bad idea, Sumin breathed. Terrible, Minjun agreed, then kissed her again. They didn't sleep together that night, both maintaining some final barrier, but the dam had cracked. Every interaction afterward carried the weight of that kiss, the knowledge of desire acknowledged if not consummated. The night everything changed started ordinarily enough. A Wednesday deal, Minjun meeting with suppliers from Busan, routine business about importing electronics, that were almost certainly something else. Sumin was present in her usual capacity, serving drinks, maintaining the civilian pretense. The meeting took place in a private room at Phoenix Grill, after hours just Minjun and his key lieutenants with the Busan contacts. She was refilling water glasses when the first shot shattered the window. Time fragmented. Glass exploded inward. Men dove for cover. Minjun grabbed Sumin, pulled her down behind the overturned table. More shots, automatic weapons, the sound deafening in the enclosed space. Someone screamed. Blood sprayed across the wall, crimson on cream. Stay down, Minjun ordered, his body covering hers, protective even in chaos. She could see the attackers through the shattered window, men in black, faces covered, moving with military precision. A rival organization she realized distantly. The Jade Serpents maybe, or the Silver Tigers. She'd heard those names whispered in meetings, threats from competing syndicates trying to encroach on Crimson Dragon's territory. Minjun's men returned fire. The noise was apocalyptic. Sumin pressed her face into the floor, hands over her ears, trying to become smaller, invisible, anything to escape the violence erupting around her. This was real. This wasn't movie glamour or abstract criminal enterprise. This was blood and bullets and the smell of gunpowder and terror so pure it tasted metallic. One of the Busan men took a bullet to the chest, dropping 5 feet from where Sumin hid. She watched his eyes go glassy, watched life drain out like water from a broken vessel, and she understood with absolute clarity, this could be her. She was mortal. Complicit. Vulnerable. The firefight lasted maybe 3 minutes but felt like hours. When silence finally fell, broken only by groaning and the distant sound of sirens, Minjun lifted himself off Sumin, checked her for injuries with hands that trembled slightly, the only sign of his own fear. Are you hurt? She shook her head, unable to speak. We need to move. Now. He pulled her to her feet, barked orders to his surviving men. Clean this up. Standard protocol. Yun call our contact at Mapo Station by us time. Everyone out through the basement. They fled through the underground passages, a dozen people moving through darkness with practiced efficiency. Sumin's legs felt disconnected from her body, operating on autopilot. Blood stained her uniform. She didn't know if it was hers or someone else's. Minjun brought her to a safe house in Gangnam, a nondescript apartment in a building full of them. Once inside, doors locked, security checked, he finally let his own composure crack. He paced like a caged animal, fury and fear warring on his face. They knew, he said, more to himself than her. They knew the meeting time, the location. We have a leak. Sumin sat on the couch, shaking, adrenaline crash hitting hard. She'd witnessed death. Almost died herself. This wasn't abstract anymore, wasn't money in moral gray areas. This was visceral and real and terrifying. Minjun stopped pacing, crouched before her, took her face in his hands. Look at me. Sumin, look at me. She met his eyes. I'm sorry, he said, and she'd never heard him sound so raw. I shouldn't have let you be there. Shouldn't have pulled you so deep into this. But you're in now and we need to be smart. The serpents won't stop. They're trying to take Hongdae and they'll eliminate anyone associated with us. That includes you. I want out, she whispered. I know. But out isn't an option anymore. The moment you were at that table they made you a target. Your face, your connection to me, they'll use it. His thumbs brushed her cheeks, gentle despite the harsh words. I can protect you. We'll protect you. But you need to trust me completely now. No hesitation. Can you do that? Every rational thought screamed at her to run, to take her chances with witness protection, with fleeing soul entirely. But rationality had abandoned her weeks ago. And looking into Minjun's eyes, seeing genuine fear for her safety mixed with something deeper, something that looked dangerously like love, Sumin found herself nodding. I trust you. He kissed her then, not the careful, tentative kiss from before, but something desperate and claiming. She kissed back with equal fervor, both of them seeking comfort in physical connection, in the affirmation of being alive when death had come so close. They moved to the bedroom, shedding clothes and defenses, and made love with an urgency that transcended mere desire. It was survival sex, connection sex, two people clinging to each other in the wreckage of the night's violence. Afterward, wrapped in sheets in each other, Minjun traced patterns on her bare shoulder. I'm falling in love with you, he said quietly. I don't want to. It's a weakness I can't afford. But there it is. Sumin's heart clenched. I know. Me too. Then we're both idiots. Complete idiots, she agreed. They lay in silence, dawn light beginning to filter through curtains, the city waking up outside while they remained in their temporary sanctuary. Sumin thought about the woman she'd been 2 months ago, exhausted, desperate, but morally uncomplicated. That woman was gone, replaced by someone she barely recognized. Someone who delivered illegal packages, witnessed murder, become the lover of a crime lord. Someone who, despite everything, didn't regret it as much as she should. What happens now? She asked. Minjun pulled her closer. Now we find the leak. We strike back at the serpents. We consolidate power. And we keep you alive. Just another day in the life? He laughed darkly. Something like that. Welcome to the deep end, Sumin. Try not to drown. She closed her eyes, feeling the weight of choices and consequences, of bridges burned and new paths chosen. Her mother would call later today, cheerful about her improving health, and Sumin would lie about where the money came from, what she'd been doing, who she'd become. The lies were easier now. That should have terrified her. Instead, it just felt like adaptation. Survival. The same thing she'd been doing her whole life, just with different methods. Minjun's phone buzzed. Business continued even after attempted assassinations. He answered it, his voice shifting back to command mode, and Sumin listened to him issue orders, coordinate responses, play the game that had consumed both their lives. She'd wanted just work. Just simple, honest work. Instead, she'd found war, love, and transformation. Whether that made her lucky or cursed remained to be seen. But looking at Minjun's profile in the early morning light, feeling the soreness in her body from violence and passion alike, Sumin thought, at least I'm not invisible anymore. At least I'm alive. In the underworld, sometimes that was the best you could hope for. The hunt for the traitor consumed the Crimson Dragons for days after the ambush. Minjun operated with cold precision, conducting interrogations that Sumin was mercifully excluded from, reviewing communications, tracing information flows with the methodical patience of a man who'd built an empire on understanding human weakness. Sumin moved into the Gangnam safe house permanently, her old apartment abandoned with the explanation to her landlord that she'd found better opportunities. It wasn't entirely a lie. The safe house was comfortable, secure, and most importantly, staffed with Minjun's most trusted guards. She was a valuable asset now, not just romantically but strategically. Anyone wanting to hurt Minjun would target her first. She continued working at Phoenix Grill during daylight hours, maintaining the civilian facade, but the restaurant felt different now. She saw the security measures she'd previously missed. The cameras, the guards positioned as regular customers, the panic buttons hidden under tables. The whole establishment was a fortified position disguised as a dining spot, and she was both prisoner and protected within its walls. The betrayer revealed himself on a Friday night. Dongwook Han had been with the Crimson Dragons for 6 years, a mid-level operator who handled logistics and supply chain management. Quiet, competent, unremarkable, exactly the kind of person who could hide in plain sight. Minjun had trusted him with shipment schedules, meeting locations, personnel movements. All the information the Jade Serpents would need to plan a perfect ambush. They brought him to the basement during a late shift. Sumin was upstairs when it happened, but she heard the commotion, raised voices, a crash, then ominous silence. Manager Yoon found her wiping down tables and said simply, "Boss wants you downstairs." She descended into what had become familiar territory, but tonight the atmosphere was different. Dangerous. The usual workers had been cleared out, leaving just Minjun's inner circle. 5 men with faces like stone, radiating controlled violence. And in the center, Dongwook, tied to a chair, face already bearing marks of preliminary questioning. "Sumin," Minjun said, his voice perfectly calm. "Come here." She approached, her stomach churning. Minjun stood behind Dongwook, one hand resting almost gently on the bound man's shoulder. But his eyes were arctic. "Dongwook has been very cooperative," Minjun continued conversationally. "He's confirmed what we suspected. He's been feeding information to the Serpents for 3 months. Money troubles apparently. Gambling debts. They offered him a way out." Dongwook sobbed, the sound pathetic. "I didn't know they'd try to kill anyone. I swear, I thought they just wanted business intelligence." "You didn't think?" Minjun interrupted, still in that terrifyingly calm voice. "That's your problem. You didn't think about the people you'd endanger. About Sumin, who almost died because you sold us out for the price of your poor betting choices." He gestured her closer until she stood directly in front of Dongwook. The man looked up at her with desperate, pleading eyes. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry." Sumin felt nothing. She should have felt pity, maybe, or horror at what was clearly about to happen. Instead, she felt only a cold assessment. This man had nearly gotten her killed. Had betrayed people who trusted him. And now he would face consequences. "What do you think?" Minjun asked her. "What should we do with a man who sells out his family?" The question hung in the air. Sumin understood she was being tested, not just her loyalty but her willingness to participate, to fully enter this world rather than remaining an observer. Minjun was asking her to cross another line, to endorse violence, to become complicit in whatever came next. She thought about the bullet holes in Phoenix Grill's walls. The dead Busan supplier's glassy eyes. The terror she'd felt cowering behind an overturned table while automatic weapons fire turned the air into chaos. "He made his choice," she said quietly. "Now he lives with the consequences." Minjun smiled, proud, pleased, and perhaps a little sad. "That's my girl." What happened next, Sumin didn't watch. Minjun dismissed her, and she climbed back upstairs with the sound of Dong-wook's screaming following her up the stairs. She stood in the empty dining room, hands pressed against the bar, breathing carefully, and told herself this was justice. Underworld justice, but justice nonetheless. Betrayal had a price. Weakness got people killed. This was the world she'd chosen. When Min-jun emerged an hour later, his knuckles were bruised and there was blood on his shirt collar. He looked tired, older somehow, the mask of the ruthless crime lord slipping to show the man underneath. Is he? Sumin couldn't finish the question. Alive, Min-jun said. For now. He'll be dealt with properly. He moved to the bar, poured himself whiskey with shaking hands. I hate this part. The necessary violence. People think I enjoy it, but I don't. It's just necessary. Sumin went to him, wrapped her arms around him from behind, felt the tension in his body. I know. Do you? He turned to face her, searching her eyes. Do you really know what you've signed up for? Because it doesn't get easier from here. The serpents won't stop. We're at war now, and war means casualties. It means doing things that will haunt you. Can you handle that? She wanted to say yes with confidence. Instead, she said honestly, I don't know. But I'm here. That's all I can promise. He kissed her forehead, gentle despite the violence still humming through him. Then that will have to be enough. The war with the Jade Serpents escalated rapidly. 3 days after Dong-wook's interrogation, the Serpents torched a warehouse in Mapo that served as a Crimson Dragon's distribution hub. Min-jun retaliated by buying off 2 of their key lieutenants, fracturing their command structure. Back and forth it went, a chess game played with lives and territory, each side maneuvering for advantage. Sumin found herself increasingly involved in operations. Min-jun kept her close, trusting her with information that could destroy him, seeking her input on strategies. She had a knack for reading people, he discovered, could spot lies, assess loyalties, predict behaviors. Her years of service work had honed observation skills that translated surprisingly well to criminal enterprise. You should have been a spy, he joked one night, the two of them reviewing surveillance footage of a serpent meeting spot. I just wanted to be a server, she replied, though the words felt hollow now. That life, simple, exhausting but morally clear, seemed like a distant dream. The police raid came on a Tuesday morning, perfectly timed to catch the restaurant during prep. 30 officers with warrants for everything: health violations, building codes, financial irregularities. It was harassment, pure and simple, the Serpents calling in favors with cops they owned to create chaos for the Crimson Dragons. Manager Yoon handled it with practiced calm, producing licenses and documentation while Min-jun watched from the basement monitors. But they couldn't risk inspection of the underground levels. Within an hour they were evacuating, computers, files, cash, weapons, everything that mattered flowing out through hidden passages to secondary locations throughout Hongdae. Sumin helped coordinate the logistics, directing trucks, managing personnel, operating with a clarity that surprised her. When did I become this person? She wondered, watching young men with gang tattoos follow her instructions without question. When did I start giving orders to criminals? The answer she knew was gradual. No single moment of transformation, just 1,000 small choices adding up to someone unrecognizable. They relocated primary operations to a building in Siademan, bought through shell corporations and fortified over a weekend. The transition was seamless enough that business barely paused. But it cost, in money, in favors owed, in showing vulnerability that predators noticed. And the Jade Serpents did notice. Sumin was leaving the new headquarters one evening, heading to visit her mother, a trip requiring elaborate security protocols now, when the black van pulled up beside her. She had maybe 2 seconds to react before they grabbed her, a hand over her mouth, strong arms pulling her inside. The door slammed and the van accelerated, tires screaming. She fought, remembered the self-defense Min-jun had started teaching her, went for eyes and throat. But there were 3 of them, all professional, and within moments she was restrained, zip-tied, a hood thrown over her head. Panic threatened to overwhelm her. This was it, kidnapped by rivals, leverage to use against Min-jun, probably torture and death in her immediate future. All the abstract danger had finally condensed into immediate, personal terror. She forced herself to breathe, to think, to remember Min-jun's lessons about staying calm in crisis. The boss wants to meet you, a voice said in Korean. You're the Phantom's new toy, right? Let's see what you're worth. They drove for maybe 30 minutes, no way to track direction with the hood obscuring everything. When the van finally stopped and they pulled her out, Sumin could hear water, the Han River she guessed based on the smell and the lap of waves. An abandoned pier, probably the kind of location where bodies turned up in news reports. The hood came off. She stood on a decrepit pier, city lights twinkling in the distance, 3 armed men surrounding her. And ahead, a figure emerging from the shadows. The man was younger than Minjun, maybe 35, with the lean build of someone who'd grown up fighting. His face bore scars that spoke of a violent life. He smiled at her without warmth. "I'm Park," he said simply. "Leader of the Jade Serpents. You're Su-min, the server who fucked her way into the Crimson Dragons." She kept her expression neutral despite the crude description. "If you're going to kill me, just do it." Park laughed. "Brave. I like that. But no, we're not killing you. Not yet. You're much more valuable alive. See, the Phantom thinks he's untouchable, but every man has a weakness. Apparently you're his." "He won't negotiate," Su-min said, though she wasn't sure. Would Minjun compromise his position to save her? She wanted to believe he would, but also hoped he wouldn't. The organization mattered more than one person. "Then he'll watch you die slowly," Park said with a shrug. "Either way we win. His reputation breaks or we extract concessions. You're just a tool, sweetheart. Nothing personal." Before she could respond, her ears caught a sound, distant but growing. Engines. Multiple vehicles approaching fast. Park heard it too, his smile fading. "What?" The first shot took out the spotlight illuminating the pier, plunging them into darkness. Then chaos erupted. Gunfire from multiple directions, Park's men returning fire, everyone scattering. Su-min dropped flat, making herself small, and saw muzzle flashes from across the water. A boat, she realized, Minjun's forces attacking from the river. Someone grabbed her, one of Park's men, but she twisted, brought her knee up the way Minjun had taught her, connected with satisfying force. He dropped and she ran, stumbling over debris, heading away from the firefight. Minjun materialized from the darkness like his nickname promised. The Phantom indeed. He caught her, checked her for injuries with frantic hands. "You okay?" "Fine. Get us out of here." They ran together toward waiting vehicles, Minjun's men covering their retreat with suppressive fire. Park screamed orders somewhere behind them, but the Serpents were caught off guard, their position compromised, forced into defensive posture. The getaway was movie-worthy, high-speed chase through Seoul streets, police sirens wailing, rival gang members trying to cut them off. Su-min sat in the back of an SUV with Minjun's arm around her, both of them breathing hard, adrenaline surging. They took turns and shortcuts only locals knew, finally losing their pursuers in the maze of Itaewon's backstreets. When they finally stopped at another safe house, Minjun pulled her into a crushing embrace. "I thought I'd lost you," he said into her hair. "When they took you his voice broke. "I'm okay," she assured him, though she was shaking. "How did you find me?" "Tracking device in your phone. And I've had people watching Park for weeks. The second they moved on you, we mobilized." He pulled back to look at her face, wiped away tears she hadn't realized were falling. "I should have protected you better. You saved me. That's what matters." They made love that night with a desperation born of mortality, of the knife edge between life and death they both walked. Afterward, tangled together in sheets, Su-min realized something had shifted. Before, she'd been playing at being part of this world, maintaining some internal distance, some sense that she could still return to normal life. But normal life didn't include kidnappings and rescue missions. Didn't include falling asleep with a loaded gun on the nightstand. Didn't include loving a man whose enemies would happily torture her to hurt him. She was in. Fully, irrevocably, completely in. And whether that was a triumph or a tragedy, she couldn't say. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I love you too," Minjun replied, his voice rough with emotion. "And I swear I'll never let them take you again. Whatever it costs." Promises made in the aftermath of violence, sealed with kisses that tasted like survival. Su-min closed her eyes and tried not to think about all the ways this could end, tried to focus only on the present. The warmth of Minjun's body, the safety of this moment, the fact that she was alive against considerable odds. Tomorrow would bring more war, more danger, more impossible choices. But tonight they had this. And in the underworld, sometimes that was the only heaven you got. The proposal came 3 weeks after Su-min's kidnapping, presented over breakfast in yet another safe house. They'd moved twice more, paranoia and caution now ruling every decision. Minjun set down his coffee, reached across the table to take her hand, and said with surprising formality, "Marry me." Su-min nearly choked on her rice. "What?" "Marry me," he repeated. "Not just because I love you, though I do. But because it consolidates power. Makes you untouchable under our codes. The underworld has rules, You don't touch another man's wife, not without starting a war nobody can afford. It's protection politics and, his grip tightened slightly, what I genuinely want. You're already in this. Make it official. She stared at him, her mind racing. Marriage. 6 months ago she'd been a server juggling 3 jobs, her biggest concerns late shifts and overdue bills. Now a mafia boss was proposing marriage as a combination of romance and strategic alliance. That's possibly the least romantic proposal in history, she said. I know. I'm terrible at this. Minjun actually looked nervous, vulnerability showing through his usual confidence. But I mean it, Sumin. I want you beside me permanently. As partner, not possession. What we've built, it's real. Make it permanent. Part of her wanted to scream yes, to embrace this strange new life fully, to claim the security and status that came with being the Phantom's wife. But another part, the part that still remembered who she'd been, hesitated. Can I think about it? She asked. Something flickered in his eyes. Disappointment, maybe, or fear, but he nodded. Of course. Take your time. The answer came 2 days later, but not in the way either of them expected. Sumin was going through Minjun's office. She had access now to most Crimson Dragon's files, trusted enough to handle sensitive information, when she found the folder. It was misfiled, probably an accident, buried in financial records from 3 years ago. The label read, Hansung Manufacturing, Ulsan Incident Resolution. Her hands shook as she opened it. The documents inside detailed payments, legal fees, witness statements suppressed, investigators bribed. And at the center of it all, her father's death. Not an accident as the official report claimed. An execution disguised as mechanical failure, ordered because he'd threatened to report safety violations and illegal cost-cutting measures to labor authorities. The factory foreman had panicked, reached out to criminal contacts for help making the problem disappear. Those contacts had been Crimson Dragon's operatives in Ulsan. The final signature on the authorization, Minjun Beck. The world tilted. Sumin sat down hard, papers scattering, her vision tunneling. 3 years. 3 years she'd blamed fate, blamed corporate negligence, blamed random chance. But it had been murder. Ordered by the man she loved. The man who'd held her while she cried about her father, who'd promised to help find the truth, who'd known the truth all along because he'd written it. When Minjun returned to the office hours later, he found her still sitting there, the folder open on the desk between them. His face went pale. Sumin. You killed my father. Her voice sounded dead even to her own ears. It wasn't, he stopped, ran his hand through his hair, looking more shaken than she'd ever seen him. It wasn't personal. I didn't even know about you then. It was just business, just another contract from a local asset. Just business. She laughed, the sound brittle and broken. My father died because of your just business. And you've known this whole time. When you promised to help me find answers, you already had them. I was going to tell you, Minjun said desperately. But then we got close and I knew it would destroy us and I kept waiting for the right time. There is no right time to admit you murdered someone's father. She stood, fury finally breaking through shock. Everything between us, was it guilt? Pity? Did you recruit me because you felt bad about having my father killed? No. He moved toward her but she backed away. I recruited you because you were talented, because I saw potential. You saw an opportunity to assuage your conscience by playing savior to the daughter of a man you had murdered. The words came out cold, prosecutorial. I was a project. A redemption arc for the bad guy. That's not true. What we have is real. What we have is built on lies and blood. Sumin grabbed her bag, her phone, moving toward the door. My father's blood specifically. Minjun caught her arm, not rough but desperate. Please. Let me explain properly. Let me. She pulled free and the look she gave him made him flinch. You want to explain how you decided my father's life was worth less than convenient business relations? How you let me fall in love with you while knowing you destroyed my family? There's no explanation that makes this okay, Minjun. I know. I know it's not okay. But you can't leave now, it's not safe. I don't care. She reached the door, hand on the knob, then turned back. Her eyes were dry, fury burning away tears. You asked me to marry you. The answer is no. I can't marry the man who killed my father. I can't stay in this world with these people living this life. I'm done. She walked out and he didn't stop her. Maybe he knew he had no right to. Maybe he understood that some betrayals were too fundamental to overcome. Either way, she made it to the street, hailed a taxi, and disappeared into Seoul's vast anonymity before his people could organize a pursuit. For 3 days, Sumin stayed with a friend from her old cafe job, a girl who asked no questions and offered her couch with simple generosity. She turned off her phone, avoided anywhere the Crimson Dragons might look, and tried to process the implosion of her entire world. Her father's death had been her origin story, the tragedy that shaped her struggle. And it had been authored by the man she loved. The cosmic cruelty of it was almost poetic. She should have gone to the police, turned over everything she knew, buried Minjun and his organization. Should have become a witness, gotten protection, started over somewhere far from Seoul. But some part of her, the part that had been shaped by months in the underworld, that understood power and survival, knew that path led to death. Not immediately, maybe, but eventually. Snitches didn't prosper in this world. The knock on her friend's door came on the 4th day. Sumin opened it expecting Minjun and found instead Manager Yoon, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. "We have a problem," Yoon said without preamble. "A big one. And Minjun needs your help." "He can manage without me." "Not this time." Yoon pushed inside uninvited, lowered her voice. "The serpents know you left. They think it means weakness in our structure. They're planning something major. We have intelligence suggesting a coordinated hit on multiple Crimson Dragons locations. If it succeeds, it collapses everything. And Minjun," she paused, "he's not operating well. The man is a mess, Sumin. Everyone can see it. We need him focused if we're going to survive what's coming." "That's not my problem." "Isn't it?" Yoon's eyes were hard. "You're part of this organization whether you accept it or not. You know too much to walk away cleanly. And whether you admit it or not, you care about what happens to us." To him. Sumin wanted to deny it. Wanted to say she felt nothing, that Minjun's fate didn't matter to her anymore. But the words wouldn't come. "What do you want from me?" she asked finally. "Help us with the heist." "What heist?" Yoon smiled grimly. "The one that might save us all. Or destroy us trying." The plan was audacious to the point of insanity. Rob the Jade Serpent's primary money laundering operation, a casino in Gangnam that processed tens of millions of won weekly. Hit them economically, fracture their funding structure, buy time for the Crimson Dragons to regroup and fortify. It required perfect timing, inside information, and a level of coordination that seemed nearly impossible. And they wanted Sumin to help coordinate it. She met with Minjun in a neutral location, a hotel room rented under a false name, both of them flanked by bodyguards who stayed outside. The moment she saw him, her resolve wavered. He looked haggard, older, the weight of leadership and guilt etched into new lines around his eyes. "Thank you for coming," he said quietly. "I'm here for the organization. Not for you." "I know." He gestured to the table where blueprints and schedules were spread out. "The casino operates with regular cash transfers on Fridays. If we intercept the transfer and simultaneously hack their digital accounts, we can extract enough to cripple their operations for months." They spent hours reviewing the plan, and despite her anger, Sumin found herself drawn into the intellectual puzzle of it. She'd developed skills in the past months: situational awareness, timing, understanding of security systems. She provided insights that refined their approach, spotted vulnerabilities in their strategy. It was during a break, both of them drinking coffee in tense silence, that Minjun spoke. "I can't undo what I did to your father," he said. "Can't change the past or erase my sins. But I can tell you that I didn't know who you were when we met. Didn't connect the names. Your father was just a file to me back then, and by the time I realized who you were to that case I was already falling for you. Does that make it better?" Sumin asked bitterly. "No. It makes it worse probably. But it's the truth." He met her eyes. "I love you. That's real. Everything else, the recruitment, the mentoring, all of it, started as strategy but became genuine. I don't deserve forgiveness. But I want you to know you weren't a project. You're the only real thing in my life." She wanted to harden her heart against him, to maintain her righteous anger. But the truth was more complicated. Yes, he'd ordered her father's death. Yes, he'd lied by omission. But he'd also saved her mother, protected her, taught her to be strong rather than just survive. The man who'd destroyed her past had also given her a future, twisted as that calculus was. "I don't know if I can forgive you," she said finally. "Maybe ever." "I know. But I'll help with the heist. Because you're right, I'm part of this whether I like it or not. And because," she faltered, "because despite everything I don't want you to die." "That's enough," Minjun said. "For now that's enough." The heist went down on a Friday night, orchestrated chaos that would have made any crime film proud. Sumin coordinated the digital assault from a van parked 3 blocks away, guiding their hacker through firewalls and security protocols while Minjun led the physical team inside the casino. Everything went perfectly for the first 20 minutes. They breached the counting room, subdued security, loaded the cash. Simultaneously, millions transferred from Serpent accounts into untraceable crypto wallets. It was working. Then the Serpent's backup security arrived. Off-duty cops apparently paid well enough to respond to silent alarms. Suddenly Minjun's team was trapped, outnumbered, engaged in a firefight in the casino's back halls with law enforcement who couldn't officially be law enforcement. Sumin made the call to activate their exit strategy, pulling the fire alarm throughout the building, causing enough chaos and evacuation to cover their retreat. But not everyone made it out. 2 Crimson Dragons operatives were killed, 3 more arrested. The financial haul was massive, yes, enough to badly damage the Serpents, but the cost was steep. She met Minjun at the fallback location, a warehouse in Incheon. He was covered in someone else's blood, his expression shell-shocked. They'd won the battle but lost people in the process, and the weight of command was crushing him. "We did it," he said flatly. "We hurt them badly. Cost us, but we survived." Sumin thought about the 2 dead operatives, about the ones facing arrest and prison time, about all the lives touched and damaged by this criminal chess game. She thought about her father, another casualty of this world's ruthless logic. "Is it worth it?" she asked. "All of this? The violence, the death, the constant war?" Minjun was quiet for a long time. "I don't know anymore," he admitted. "I used to think I was building something better than the alternative, that our version of order was preferable to chaos. Now I'm not sure. I've lost perspective." She moved closer, not quite touching him but near enough to offer what comfort proximity allowed. "My father didn't deserve what happened to him. Neither do the people who died tonight. But we're here in this moment, and we can either destroy ourselves with guilt or try to do better going forward." "Can we?" He finally looked at her. "Do better? I don't know. But maybe that's what we try for." She reached out, took his bloody hand in hers. "I haven't forgiven you. Might never forgive you completely. But I understand you. And I love you despite knowing I shouldn't. So maybe we figure out how to live with these contradictions." He pulled her close then and she let him, both of them holding each other in the midst of wreckage, literal and metaphorical. It wasn't reconciliation exactly. More like an armistice, a mutual agreement to exist in the moral gray space they'd created. Outside, sirens wailed. Inside, 2 broken people tried to find solid ground in a world they'd helped make unstable. The heist had saved the organization, yes, but it hadn't saved them from themselves. And as dawn broke over Incheon, Sumin understood that this was her life now, forever weighing impossible choices, forever living with consequences, forever trying to find meaning in a world that seemed designed to strip it away. Her father would have been ashamed. She was ashamed. But she was also still standing, still fighting, still alive. In the underworld, sometimes that was the closest you got to redemption. The months following the casino heist brought strange stability to the chaos. The Jade Serpents, financially wounded and strategically off balance, retreated to consolidate their position. The Crimson Dragons, flush with stolen cash and renewed confidence, expanded into territories the Serpents had weakened. For a brief window, there was something almost resembling peace, or at least a ceasefire that everyone knew was temporary. Sumin found herself rising through the organization's ranks with unexpected speed. Minjun, perhaps trying to prove he valued her for more than romance, gave her increasing responsibility. She started handling negotiations with smaller affiliated gangs, managing supply chain logistics, even participating in strategy sessions with the inner circle. The men who'd once seen her as just the boss's girlfriend began respecting her tactical insights and unflappable composure under pressure. "You're a natural," Minjun said one evening, reviewing her successful negotiation with a reluctant protection client. "Better at this than half my lieutenants who've been in the game for decades." "Maybe I just understand what it's like to be powerless," Sumin replied, scanning through financial reports on her laptop. "So I know what people need to hear to feel less helpless." They'd settled into a new dynamic after their conflict over her father's death, professional partnership with an undercurrent of unresolved romance. They still shared a bed most nights, still found comfort in physical intimacy, but something had shifted. Trust, once absolute, was now conditional. Love, once pure, was now complicated by knowledge of what each was capable of. Sumin trained harder in self-defense, spending hours weekly with a former Special Forces operative who taught her not just how to protect herself but how to attack effectively. She learned weapons handling, tactical thinking, how to read rooms for threats. The soft woman who'd once only wanted honest work was disappearing, replaced by someone harder, sharper, more dangerous. Her mother's health continued improving, the expensive treatments finally yielding results. But their phone conversations grew increasingly difficult, Sumin's lies multiplying as her mother asked about work, about her life, about why she never had time to visit Ulsan anymore. "I'm just busy, Mom. The restaurant is demanding." "You sound different, my daughter." "Tired." "Are they treating you well?" "Yes, Mom. Everything is fine." The lies came easier now. That should have bothered her more than it did. The challenge to Minjun's leadership came from an unexpected direction, not the Jade Serpents, but from within allied organizations. Kwon, the boss of the Silver Blade syndicate that operated in Eastern Seoul, publicly questioned whether Minjun had gone soft, whether his relationship with Sumin had compromised his judgment. "The Phantom has been domesticated," Kwon announced during a council meeting that brought together leaders from multiple gangs. Sumin was present, standing behind Minjun, watching the older man's calculated disrespect. "He prioritizes his woman over strategic advantage. We all saw how he nearly destroyed his organization chasing after her when she was taken." The room went quiet, tension crackling. This was a direct challenge, the kind that in the underworld couldn't be ignored without appearing weak. Minjun stood slowly, his expression perfectly calm. "You're right that I value Sumin. But if you think that makes me weak, you're welcome to test that theory. Here and now if you'd like." Kwon studied him, calculating odds. Minjun was younger, faster, and had a reputation for brutal efficiency in personal combat. But backing down would also show weakness. "I don't need to fight you to know you've lost your edge," Kwon said carefully. The old Phantom would have finished the Serpents months ago instead of accepting stalemate. Would have eliminated threats preemptively rather than waiting for them to strike first. "The old Phantom was reckless," Minjun replied. "Won battles but forgot about the war. I'm building something sustainable, not just ruling through terror. If that seems soft to you, perhaps you're too accustomed to senseless violence." The insult hung in the air. Other leaders shifted in their seats, clearly uncomfortable with the escalating confrontation. Finally, an older boss named Lee intervened. "Enough. We're allies, not enemies. Kwon, Minjun's personal life is his own business. Minjun, perhaps consider that perception matters in leadership. This meeting is adjourned." But the damage was done. Word spread through Seoul's underworld that the Phantom was vulnerable, that his famous ruthlessness had been tempered by love. Enemies started testing boundaries, pushing into territories they'd previously avoided, seeing if the rumors of weakness were true. Minjun responded with calculated shows of force. A particularly aggressive loan shark operating in Mapo found himself hospitalized with broken bones and a warning to respect territorial boundaries. A restaurant owner who'd been secretly paying protection to both Crimson Dragons and Jade Serpents received a very public visit that made his loyalties clear. But the challenges kept coming like sharks scenting blood. "They're right," Minjun said one night, alone with Sumin in their apartment. "I have gone soft. Before you, I would have killed Kwon for that disrespect. Would have made an example that no one would forget. And now?" Sumin asked. "Now I wonder if there's a better way. If maybe building through respect rather than fear is more sustainable." He looked at her. "Is that weakness? Or growth?" "Maybe it's both," she said. "Maybe they're not mutually exclusive." The romantic moments between them intensified during this period, as if they were both trying to prove that what they had was worth the complications it caused. Late nights after stressful negotiations would dissolve into passionate encounters, seeking physical connection as an anchor against the chaos. Mornings would bring quiet domesticity, shared coffee, planning the day, small touches that communicated care without words. But underlying it all was awareness that they were living on borrowed time, that the forces they'd set in motion had momentum that couldn't be easily controlled. The betrayal, when it came, was devastating precisely because it came from someone they'd both trusted completely. Jinho Park had been Minjun's friend since childhood, had risen through the Crimson Dragons alongside him, was considered family in all but blood. He handled Eastern operations, managed relationships with politicians and business leaders who needed their services. Loyal, competent, utterly reliable, or so everyone believed. Sumin discovered the truth almost by accident. She was reviewing communication logs, looking for patterns in how the Jade Serpents seemed to anticipate their moves, when she noticed something odd. Jinho's phone showed regular contact with a number that, when traced, led to a shell company used by the Serpents for sensitive communications. She brought it to Minjun with trembling hands. I think Jin-ho is compromised. Minjun's first reaction was denial. Impossible. Jin-ho and I have been through everything together. He's proven his loyalty 100 times. Then explain this. She showed him the evidence. The calls, the money transfers hidden in complicated accounting, the correlation between Jin-ho's knowledge and Serpent actions. They watched him for a week, hoping for explanations that never came. The proof mounted. Jin-ho wasn't just leaking information. He was actively coordinating with the Serpents, had been for months, positioning himself to take control of Crimson Dragon's operations once Minjun was eliminated. The confrontation happened in the basement of Phoenix Grill. Minjun's inner circle assembled. Jin-ho brought in unaware of what awaited him. Sumin watched as Minjun presented the evidence, saw the moment Jin-ho's face shifted from confusion to resignation to defiance. You've changed, Jin-ho said, not even bothering to deny it. The phantom I knew wouldn't have hesitated to expand, to crush enemies, to build an empire. But you've gotten comfortable, soft, distracted by, he gestured at Sumin with contempt, domesticity. Someone had to have the vision to move us forward. By betraying everything we built? Minjun's voice was dangerously quiet. By recognizing when a leader has outlived his effectiveness. Jin-ho stood straighter. Kill me if you want. But others see what I see. Your time is ending, old friend. The execution was handled by Minjun personally, in private. Sumin didn't witness it, but she saw Minjun afterward, blood on his hands literally and metaphorically, his expression blank with the kind of trauma that comes from killing someone you love. He was right, Minjun said, washing blood from his hands in the sink. I have changed. The old me wouldn't have felt anything. Now I feel everything. Sumin held him while he shook, this powerful, dangerous man reduced to human fragility by the necessity of violence against friendship. And she understood that they were both trapped, too deep to escape, too compromised to return to innocence, just trying to survive with whatever humanity they could preserve. The next crisis came 2 days later. Sumin and Minjun were having dinner at an upscale restaurant in Gangnam, one of their rare public outings, both wanting to project normalcy and strength to any observers. The meal was pleasant, conversation flowing easily, a brief respite from constant tension. They were walking to their car, Minjun's hand on her lower back, security trailing at a discreet distance, when the first shot cracked through the evening air. Minjun moved instantly, tackling Sumin behind a parked car as more shots followed. Their security team returned fire, screams erupting from panicked civilians. The assassination attempt was professional. Multiple shooters, positioned for crossfire, intended to end the phantom permanently. But Minjun's paranoia had prepared for exactly this scenario. Reinforcements arrived within 90 seconds. His people were always nearby, always ready. The firefight was brief but intense, ending with 2 would-be assassins dead and 1 captured. In the aftermath, crouched behind that car with bullets having passed inches from their heads, Sumin and Minjun looked at each other with a shared understanding. This was their life now, forever, until it killed them. No peaceful retirement, no simple happiness. Just this, constant vigilance, recurring violence, love existing in the spaces between attempts on their lives. We should run, Sumin said. Take the money we've accumulated and disappear. Change identities, start over somewhere far from Seoul. You know we can't, Minjun replied. Too many people depend on us. Too many enemies would hunt us. And besides, he smiled grimly, where would we run to? This is who we are now. She knew he was right, but the fantasy was appealing nonetheless. A small house somewhere tropical, no names, no past, just 2 people trying to find peace. But fantasies were luxuries they couldn't afford. The captured assassin, under interrogation, revealed what they'd suspected. The Jade Serpents had partnered with Kwan's Silver Blades, the challenge at the council meeting having been the opening move in a larger campaign. The underworld was fracturing, multiple factions sensing opportunity in the perception of Minjun's weakness. We're facing war on multiple fronts, Minjun said during an emergency strategy session. We need to strike decisively, re-establish dominance, show that the phantom still has teeth. Or, Sumin said quietly, we could negotiate. Reach out to neutral parties, build coalitions, find a political solution. You think they'll negotiate after trying to kill us? I think showing we're smart enough to avoid unnecessary bloodshed might prove strength better than more violence. She met the eyes of the assembled lieutenants. We're not trying to rule through fear anymore, right? We're trying to build something sustainable. That requires different tactics. The debate raged for hours, hawks versus doves, with Sumin emerging as an unexpected voice for strategic restraint. Not because she'd gone soft, She'd proven her capability for ruthlessness when necessary, but because she understood that endless escalation benefited no one. Eventually they agreed on a hybrid approach: show of force against the Silver Blades for their treachery, but simultaneous outreach to other organizations offering partnership rather than subjugation. It was a gamble, betting that most gangs preferred stability to chaos, that they could isolate their enemies rather than fighting everyone simultaneously. As the meeting broke up and people dispersed, Minjun pulled Sumin aside. "You've become my conscience," he said. "The voice that asks if we should before I decide how. I don't know if that's good or bad for us, but I know I need it." "Someone has to care about more than just winning," she replied. "Otherwise, what's the point?" That night, lying in bed with the city lights filtering through curtains, Sumin thought about the woman she'd been and the woman she'd become. The journey from server to strategist, from invisible to influential, from morally certain to ethically complicated. She'd wanted just work, just survival. Instead, she'd found power, love, and a role in shaping the criminal landscape of Seoul. Was it worth it? She still didn't know. But looking at Minjun sleeping beside her, his face peaceful in rare relaxation, she knew she wouldn't trade it. Wouldn't go back to invisibility and powerlessness, even knowing what the alternative cost. They were bound together now, by choice, by circumstance, by the blood they'd shed and the love they'd built in unlikely soil. The world was closing in, enemies multiplying, and the future looked increasingly uncertain. But they were together. And in the darkness of Seoul's underworld, sometimes that was the only light you got. Tomorrow would bring more battles, more betrayals, more impossible choices. But tonight they had this moment of peace. Sumin held onto it fiercely, knowing how rare such moments were, knowing they might not get many more. The storm was coming. They both felt it. The question was whether they'd survive it together, or if the forces they'd unleashed would finally tear them apart. Only time would tell. And in this world, time was the cruelest dealer of all. The war erupted on a Tuesday morning with coordinated attacks across 6 Crimson Dragons locations simultaneously. The Jade Serpents and Silver Blades had formed a full alliance, pooling resources and intelligence to launch an offensive designed to decapitate Minjun's organization in a single devastating strike. Phoenix Grill was hit first. Explosives breached the front entrance just after dawn, armed men flooding in to secure the building and access the basement operations center. But Minjun had learned from past attacks. The restaurant was now a fortress disguised as a dining establishment, with reinforced structures, multiple escape routes, and a security team that lived on site. The assault team found themselves in a kill box, taking casualties before they'd advanced 20 feet. Simultaneously, other locations came under attack. Warehouses in Mapo and Siademan, a nightclub in Itaewon that served as a front operation, residential buildings housing key personnel. The enemy strategy was clear: overwhelm through multiple strikes, force the Crimson Dragons to spread resources thin, create chaos that prevented coordinated defense. Sumin was at the Siademan Operations Center when the attack came. She'd been reviewing supply chain manifests, preparing for a meeting, when alarms screamed and gunfire erupted from the ground floor. Years of training and recent experience kicked in. She grabbed the emergency bag kept under every desk: gun, cash, fake ID, phone, barked orders to the dozen people in the office to follow evacuation protocols, and led them toward the hidden stairwell that connected to neighboring buildings. Minjun's voice crackled through her earpiece. "Siademan is under attack. Sumin, report. Evacuating now. 20 personnel, minimal casualties so far. What's the situation?" "Bad. They hit everything at once. Phoenix Grill is holding but barely. We've lost the Maple warehouse. Itaewon is a war zone." His voice was clipped, controlled, the leader rather than the lover. "Get your people to Safe House 7. I'm coordinating counterattacks from Mobile Command." "Be careful," she said, then cut the connection to focus on the immediate crisis. The evacuation was textbook at first, people moving quickly but calmly through the concealed passage. But then gunfire erupted ahead of them. The enemy had done their homework, knew about the escape route, positioned men to cut them off. Sumin found herself in a firefight in a narrow corridor, the close quarters making every shot potentially fatal for friend or foe alike. She trained for this, but training and reality existed in different universes. The noise was deafening, the smell of gunpowder overwhelming, the adrenaline making everything too fast and too slow simultaneously. She fired her weapon with surprising accuracy, saw enemies drop, felt the hot zip of bullets passing too close. One of her people took a round to the shoulder, screaming, and she had to keep moving, couldn't stop to help, just pushed forward because stopping meant death. They broke through, emerging into a parking structure, scattering to different vehicles. Sumin ended up in an SUV with 4 others, racing through Seoul streets while sirens wailed and news helicopters circled areas of reported violence. The city was waking up to the reality of gang war in its heart, and the authorities would respond with overwhelming force once they organized. Safe House 7 was an apartment building in Nowon, far from their usual territories, deliberately anonymous. Sumin arrived to find it already crowded with survivors from other locations, wounded being treated, people checking weapons, the organized chaos of a military retreat. Minjun arrived 30 minutes later, his suit torn, blood on his face from a grazed bullet. Casualty count? He demanded immediately. 17 dead so far, reported his second-in-command, a scarred veteran named Choi. Another 23 wounded. We've lost 3 major locations permanently. Phoenix Grill is ours but heavily damaged. The enemy took losses too, but they came ready for war. Minjun's jaw clenched. 17 dead. These were people he'd known, worked with, some for years. This was the cost of leadership written in blood. He looked around the room, saw fear alongside determination on faces that ranged from teenagers to veterans, and Sumin watched him make a visible shift, from grief to command, personal feelings locked away in favor of necessary strategy. We hit them back, he said. Tonight. While they're celebrating what they think is a decisive victory, we strike their core operations. Full commitment, everything we have left. They wanted war. We'll give them war. The planning took hours. Intelligence was pooled, targets identified, teams assembled. The Jade Serpents had a stronghold in Gangnam, a converted office building that served as their headquarters. The Silver Blades operated from a compound in Songbuk-gu, fortified but possibly overconfident after the morning's success. The strategy was to divide their remaining forces, hit both locations simultaneously, cause enough damage to cripple both organizations' capacity to continue the war. It was risky to the point of suicidal. They were wounded, depleted, attacking fortified positions with reduced numbers. But the alternative was slow destruction as their enemies methodically eliminated them location by location. Sumin was assigned to lead the team hitting the Silver Blades compound. Minjun wanted to keep her out of direct combat, but she'd argued forcefully that splitting leadership meant both operations could adapt independently if things went wrong. And besides, she'd proven herself capable. She wasn't the frightened server anymore. She was a soldier in this war, and soldiers didn't hide when battles were fought. They equipped for assault, body armor, automatic weapons, explosives, communication equipment. Sumin looked at her reflection in a van window, seeing someone unrecognizable. Black tactical gear, gun in hand, face set with determination and fear in equal measure. 6 months ago, she'd been serving bulgogi and dreaming of paying rent on time. Now she was leading an assault team against a fortified gang compound. The absurdity would have been funny if it wasn't so terrifying. You don't have to do this, Minjun said, pulling her aside before the teams deployed. I can send Choi with your team, keep you here in reserve. We've been through this. The organization needs both of us operational. Dividing leadership strengthens us. I could lose you tonight. You could, she acknowledged. I could lose you too. But we knew this was coming. We chose this life. She touched his face gently. I love you. Whatever happens, know that. He kissed her then, hard and desperate, in full view of everyone preparing for the operation. When they broke apart, his eyes were bright with unshed tears. Come back to me, he said. You too. The attacks commenced at midnight. Sumin's team approached the Silver Blades compound from 3 directions, using the darkness and element of surprise to get close before the shooting started. She'd studied the layout obsessively, knew the weak points, the sight lines, the places where defenders would position themselves. The first explosion took out the front gate, their demolitions expert working with precision timing. Immediately, Sumin's team poured through the breach, engaging defenders who'd been caught off guard but responded quickly. It was urban warfare at its most chaotic, clearing rooms, checking corners, facing enemies who knew the terrain better than they did. Sumin moved through it in a state of hyperfocus, issuing commands, coordinating movements, occasionally firing her weapon when targets presented themselves. People died around her, both enemies and her own team. She saw a young operative she trained with take a bullet to the head, dropping instantly, and she had to step over his body to keep advancing because stopping meant more deaths, meant failure, meant losing everything they'd fought to build. They fought floor by floor, room by room. The Silver Blades fought viciously, knowing they were fighting for survival. Kwon himself appeared on the 3rd floor, weapon in hand, screaming defiance. Sumin faced him across a destroyed office, both of them bloodied, exhausted. "You're the server," he said, almost laughing. "The Phantom's pet. And you're leading this." "I'm nobody's pet," Sumin replied and fired. Kwon went down, wounded but not dead, and she advanced to finish it. His eyes showed surprise more than fear, disbelief that this woman, this outsider, had brought him down. She pulled the trigger again, watched the light leave his eyes, and felt nothing. No triumph, no guilt. Just hollow necessity. The compound fell within 2 hours. The silver blades were broken, leadership dead or scattered, their operations shattered beyond recovery. Sumin stood in the rubble, her team regrouping, taking stock of casualties. They'd lost 8 people. 8 lives ended because of strategic decisions she participated in, because of a war she was now integral to. Her phone rang. "Minjun." "Status?" he asked. "Compound secured. Kwon is dead. We took heavy losses but achieved objectives. You. Jade Serpent's headquarters is burning. Park escaped but his organization is finished. It's over, Sumin. We won." The word should have brought relief, triumph, something. Instead, Sumin felt only exhaustion and the weight of all the death her hands had contributed to. She looked around at the destruction, the bodies, the young people who'd followed her orders and died doing it. "At what cost?" she asked quietly. Minjun's pause told her he understood. "I'm sending vehicles. Come home." The aftermath of the war was strange and hollow. The Crimson Dragons had won, yes, eliminated or absorbed rival organizations, established dominance over Seoul's underworld more comprehensively than ever before. Police, overwhelmed by the violence and aware that the gang war had resolved itself, opted for selective arrests of minor players while allowing the new power structure to stabilize. Corrupt officials on the Crimson Dragons' payroll ensured investigations went nowhere. But victory felt Pyrrhic. 43 Crimson Dragons personnel had died in the fighting. Dozens more wounded, some permanently disabled. Families destroyed, lives ended, and for what? Territorial control? Criminal market share? The right to run illegal operations without competition? Sumin and Minjun returned to something resembling normal operations, but both were changed. Minjun, never warm but previously confident, now carried a weariness that aged him. He'd proven he could still be the ruthless phantom when necessary, but the cost had been pieces of his humanity he'd never recover. Sumin found herself haunted by faces, the people who died under her command, the enemies she'd killed personally, including Kwon's shocked expression as she pulled the trigger. She'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. She was a killer now, not in abstract but in concrete reality. They made love one night a week after the war's end, both seeking comfort and physical connection. But afterward, lying in darkness, Sumin said what they'd both been thinking. "I don't know if I can do this anymore." Minjun was quiet for a long time. "I know. I'm not sure I can either." "Then what do we do?" He turned to face her, and in the dim light she saw the same exhaustion and moral injury she felt. "We've built something big, something powerful. But you were right months ago, winning isn't enough. There has to be purpose beyond just survival and dominance." "What kind of purpose?" "I don't know yet. But I know I'm tired of death. Tired of war. Tired of looking at my hands and seeing blood." He took her hand, pressed it to his chest where his heartbeat thrummed steadily. "I love you, Sumin. You're the best thing that's ever happened to me. But you're also the mirror that shows me what I've become. And I don't like what I see." She understood completely. They'd built their relationship in the underworld, forged in fire and violence, but maybe they could transform it into something different. Something better. "Then let's change it," she said. "Not overnight but gradually. Use the power we've gained to do something other than perpetuate cycles of violence." "You make it sound simple." "It's not. But we've done impossible things already. Why not one more?" He kissed her forehead, gentle and protective. "Okay. We try. Together." Outside, Seoul continued its relentless pace, millions of people living normal lives in blissful ignorance of the criminal empire that operated in their midst. And in one quiet bedroom, 2 people who'd become something they'd never intended tried to imagine a different future. The reckoning had passed. They'd survived, barely at terrible cost. Now came the harder work of living with consequences and trying to build something worth the sacrifices made. Whether they'd succeed remained uncertain. But for the first time in months they had hope. Fragile, tentative hope that maybe redemption was possible even for people like them. It was a start. In the darkness, sometimes a start was enough. The surveillance photograph arrived by courier 3 weeks after the war's end, delivered to Phoenix Grill in an unmarked envelope during the lunch rush. Manager Yoon brought it directly to Minjun's office, her face pale with concern. Inside was a single image: Soo-min and Min-jun leaving their Gangnam apartment, high resolution, professionally taken. No note, no demands. Just the photograph and its implicit message: we see you, we know where you are, and we can reach you anytime we want. Min-jun studied the image with a carefully neutral expression, but Soo-min saw the muscle in his jaw tighten. Who sent this? No idea, Yoon replied. Courier service said it was a cash transaction, no name given. But the timing and quality suggest law enforcement. Or someone who wants us to think it's law enforcement. Min-jun set the photo down. Either way, it's a warning. Things are moving. The war with rival gangs had ended, but a new threat had emerged. Legitimate authority finally taking notice of the underworld's restructuring. The Crimson Dragon's dominance was too complete, their operations too visible after the recent violence. Prosecutors who'd previously been paid to look away were facing public pressure to do something about organized crime. Reform-minded officials were launching investigations. The careful balance Min-jun had maintained between criminality and deniability was eroding. The first arrest came a week later. Mid-level operators, carefully chosen to be removed enough from leadership to maintain plausible deniability but close enough to implicate the organization if they talked. Standard prosecutorial strategy: build cases from the bottom up, flip low-level criminals against higher-ups, work toward the real targets. They're coming for us, Choi said during an emergency meeting. Not today, maybe not next month. But they're building a case. Eventually they'll have enough to move against core leadership. Min-jun leaned back in his chair, the weight of inevitability settling over the room. Options. We could eliminate the arrested operators before they talk, suggested one lieutenant. Witness protection exists for a reason, Min-jun replied. Killing them just proves the prosecutor's points and adds murder charges to everything else. We could increase our payments to officials by more time, another voice offered. There's always someone who can't be bought, Soo-min interjected. She'd been quiet until now, reviewing legal documents that friendly lawyers had provided. And the reformers are precisely those people. They're building careers on fighting corruption. Bribing them is impossible. Then what do you suggest? Min-jun asked, though his tone suggested he already knew her answer. We get ahead of it, she said carefully. Turn state's evidence before they force us to. Negotiate immunity in exchange for testimony about police corruption, political connections, the whole ecosystem that allows organized crime to flourish. Burn it all down, but on our terms. The suggestion landed like a bomb. Multiple voices erupted in protest. That was betrayal, that was suicide, that violated every code the underworld operated by. Informants were the lowest form of life in criminal society. What Soo-min was suggesting was unthinkable. But Min-jun raised a hand for silence, his eyes locked on hers. You're talking about becoming snitches. I'm talking about survival, she corrected. We've won the gang war. We've consolidated power. But we're building sandcastles with the tide coming in. The law has resources we can't match indefinitely. Better to negotiate from strength while we can than wait for them to dismantle us piece by piece. And the people we testify against? The cops we've paid, the officials who've looked away? They'd be destroyed. They made their choices, Soo-min said firmly. Same as we made ours. The difference is we're offering them the dignity of legal process rather than bullets in back alleys. That's more mercy than we've shown most people. The debate raged for hours, but Soo-min's strategic thinking had become integral to the organization's decision-making. She argued that their testimony could be selective, enough to buy immunity without completely dismantling the power structures they'd built relationships with. A controlled burn rather than wildfire. Min-jun privately saw another appeal, a chance to exit the life that had consumed him since childhood, to step away with Soo-min before age or bullets caught up to them. He was tired of violence, of constant vigilance, of the weight of leadership. The prospect of walking away with immunity was seductive. But it required one impossible thing: betraying everyone who'd trusted him. If we do this, he said finally, addressing the room, we need unanimous consent from core leadership. This affects everyone. I won't make this decision unilaterally. The vote took 3 days of discussion, argument, and soul-searching. In the end, it was narrowly approved, not because people liked it but because the alternative was slow destruction through legal attrition. Better to control the ending than have it forced upon them. Soo-min made the initial contact with prosecutors through a criminal defense attorney who specialized in negotiating cooperation agreements. The terms were harsh: testify about specific corruption cases, provide documentation of illegal activities, agree to asset forfeiture of funds that could be proven criminal in origin. In exchange, immunity from prosecution for Soo-min and Min-jun, witness protection if needed, and a chance to start over. You understand what you're doing? The lead prosecutor asked during one negotiation session. She was a sharp woman in her 40s named Kim, career built on taking down corrupt officials. Your community will view you as traitors. There's no coming back from this. We understand, Soo-min replied. But there's no coming back from prison either. At least this way we have agency in our ending. The decision to move forward created immediate blowback within the organization. Despite the leadership vote, many members viewed cooperation with authorities as ultimate betrayal. Tensions rose. Threats emerged. Min-jun and Soo-min's security detail tripled, and they stopped sleeping in the same location twice. One night, lying in yet another anonymous safe house, Min-jun pulled Soo-min close. Do you ever regret it? Meeting me, entering this life? Every day, she said honestly. And also never. Both things are true. That's the most honest thing anyone's ever said to me. We're past the point of comforting lies. She turned to face him. I regret the violence, the deaths, who I had to become. But I don't regret you. Don't regret that we found each other, even in these circumstances. Love in darkness is still love. Poet, he teased gently, though his eyes were serious. What do you want, Soo-min? After all this ends? Assuming we survive the ending? She thought about this question obsessively. Small life. Real name or fake name doesn't matter. Somewhere quiet. Maybe by the ocean like Jeju. Run a small business. Cafe, restaurant, something legitimate. Watch sunsets. Visit my mother without lying about how I spend my days. Is that too much to ask? It sounds perfect. He kissed her softly. Let's make it happen. The plan came together over weeks. They'd provide their testimony, hand over documentation, accept witness protection, and disappear. Start fresh somewhere far from Seoul's underworld, build something honest from the ruins of their criminal empire. It wasn't redemption exactly, too many sins for that, but it was a path away from perpetual violence. Then Soo-min discovered she was pregnant. The realization came during a routine appointment at a private clinic they used for discreet medical care. She'd been feeling off, nauseous, exhausted, emotional, and had assumed it was stress from the legal proceedings. Instead, the doctor smiled and congratulated her on being roughly 8 weeks along. Soo-min sat in the examination room for a long time after the doctor left, staring at the ultrasound image that showed barely more than a blob but represented everything. A child. Growing inside her. Min-jun's child, conceived during one of their desperate attempts at normalcy amid chaos. When she told him that night, Min-jun went absolutely still. Then slowly he smiled, a genuine, unguarded expression of joy she'd rarely seen. A baby, he breathed. We're going to have a baby. In the middle of cooperating with prosecutors and dismantling our organization and probably entering witness protection, Soo-min pointed out, though she was smiling too. Our timing is terrible. Our timing has always been terrible. He placed his hand on her stomach, still flat but housing their future. But maybe this is the universe telling us we made the right choice. We're getting out, Soo-min. And we're going to raise this child somewhere safe, somewhere normal, away from all this darkness. The pregnancy changed everything and nothing. It made the stakes higher. Now they weren't just trying to save themselves but their child's future. It also provided motivation during moments of doubt, when the betrayal of Turning State's evidence felt overwhelming. They were doing this for someone who'd had no choice in their circumstances, who deserved better than being born into the underworld. Soo-min's testimony began 3 months into the pregnancy, when she was starting to show but could still disguise it with clever clothing. She sat in federal offices and detailed years of corruption, which police took payoffs, which politicians provided protection, how money flowed through legitimate businesses to hide its origins. She provided documentation, recordings, evidence that destroyed careers and sent shockwaves through Seoul's power structures. Min-jun followed with his own testimony, corroborating and expanding. He provided information about intergang operations, about how organized crime and legitimate authority had become inseparably intertwined, about the system that had allowed people like him to flourish. The prosecutors were delighted. They had enough to launch dozens of investigations, to clean house in ways they'd never been able to before. Headlines screamed about the Crimson Dragon's betrayal and the Phantom's fall. Public opinion was divided. Some saw them as rats saving themselves, others as brave whistleblowers exposing corruption. The underworld saw them only as traitors. The price on their heads was substantial. 20 million won to whoever killed Minjun, 10 million for Soo-min. Every remaining gangster in Seoul suddenly had motivation to try. The safe houses multiplied. The security detail became oppressive. They lived like prisoners, ironically, while working to avoid actual prison. Is this what freedom looks like? Soo-min asked one evening, watching from behind bulletproof windows as armed guards patrolled outside. It's what transition looks like, Minjun replied. Freedom comes after. We just have to survive until then. The final testimony session came when Soo-min was 6 months pregnant, her condition impossible to hide. Prosecutor Kim had assured them this would be the last required appearance before they entered official witness protection and could disappear. Just one more day of questions, documentation, and legal maneuvering. They were leaving the federal building, surrounded by armed marshals, when the attempt came. A lone gunman with a rifle, positioned on a building across the street, professional enough to bypass security screening but not professional enough to account for every variable. He fired 3 shots. One struck a marshal, one hit the armored vehicle, and one passed so close to Soo-min that she felt the displacement of air. Minjun covered her body with his, shielding her and their unborn child, while return fire from marshals eliminated the threat. The gunman fell from his perch, dead before he hit the ground. Later investigation would identify him as a Silver Blade's remnant, seeking revenge and the promised bounty. In the protected vehicle speeding away from the scene, Soo-min felt her hands shaking uncontrollably. That close. They'd come that close to dying, to having their child die before even being born. Minjun held her, both of them processing how fragile their survival truly was. I'm done, she said. No more appearances, no more testimony. We've given them enough. It's time to disappear. Agreed, Minjun replied. We've upheld our end. Now they uphold theirs. Prosecutor Kim, to her credit, understood. The immunity agreements were finalized, documentation completed, and arrangements made for their departure. They were given new identities, a cash stake to start their new lives, and transportation to their chosen destination. Jeju Island, far from Seoul's darkness, far from the world they'd inhabited. The goodbyes were limited. Soo-min visited her mother one final time, carefully surveilled by marshals to ensure no one followed. She sat with the woman who'd raised her, who'd survived illness thanks to money earned through criminal enterprise, and tried to explain. I'm leaving, Mom. Starting over somewhere new. I can't tell you where and you can't contact me. But I'm safe and I'm happy and I'm going to have a baby. Her mother, older and frilier but no fool, studied her daughter's face. You were never just a server, were you? No, Mom. I wasn't. But you're free now? Whatever you were involved in, it's over? It's over, Soo-min confirmed. I promise. Her mother held her for a long time, then blessed her forehead in the old way, wishing her peace and protection. Be happy, my daughter. That's all I ever wanted for you. It was the last time they'd see each other, though Soo-min didn't say that aloud. Some goodbyes were too painful for complete honesty. 3 days later, Soo-min and Minjun boarded a ferry to Jeju under false names, their past lives officially dead, their future uncertain but theirs to shape. They stood on the deck as Seoul disappeared into haze behind them, both contemplating the city that had made and nearly destroyed them. Any regrets? Minjun asked. Soo-min placed his hand on her swollen belly, feeling their child kick. Too many to count. But also no. We're alive, we're together, and we're free. That's more than we had any right to hope for. He kissed her as the ferry cut through gray waters toward new horizons, and for the first time in years, neither of them was looking over their shoulder for threats. The fall of their criminal empire had become their redemption. Imperfect, costly, but real. Behind them, in Seoul, prosecutors were using their testimony to reshape power structures. The Crimson Dragons dissolved, key members arrested or scattered. The corrupt officials they'd exposed faced justice. The system they'd operated within was being torn down and rebuilt, slowly, imperfectly, but genuinely. And ahead, on Jeju Island, a small cafe awaited new owners, a quiet life beckoned, and a child grew toward birth in a world free from the shadows that had defined their parents. It wasn't a happy ending, too much blood for that, too many sins that couldn't be washed away. But it was an ending that allowed for possibility, for hope, for something better than what they'd known. Sometimes that was the best redemption offered. And sometimes it was enough. The cafe was small, barely 12 tables, tucked into a quiet corner of Siagwipo on Jeju Island's southern coast. White walls, wooden furniture, large windows that caught the morning light and offered views of the ocean in the distance. The name, painted on a simple sign, read Fresh Start in Korean and English, perhaps too on the nose, but also perfectly honest. Sumin stood behind the counter, 7 months into their new life, her hands moving with practiced efficiency as she prepared orders. The skills she developed serving tables in Seoul translated surprisingly well to running her own establishment. Americanos and green tea lattes for the handful of morning customers. Mostly locals, a few tourists who'd wandered off the typical island circuit. The bell above the door chimed, and Minjun entered carrying their daughter, Jiwoo, who just turned 3 months old. The baby was awake and alert, her dark eyes taking in the cafe with serious curiosity that made Sumin smile every time. She wouldn't nap, Minjun explained, bringing Jiwoo to the counter. I think she takes after her mother. Stubborn. She definitely takes after her father, Sumin countered, reaching to take the baby. Look at that glare. Pure phantom energy. They'd agreed never to use Minjun's old nickname, but occasionally it slipped out in private moments. A reminder of who they'd been, kept alive so they'd never forget the cost of the life they'd left behind. Jiwoo had been born on a clear winter morning in Jeju's best hospital, under names that weren't quite real but felt increasingly genuine with use. Lee Soo-jin and Lee Min-ho, a young couple who'd moved to the island for a fresh start after burnout in Seoul's competitive business world. The cover story was simple, unverifiable, and close enough to truth to be maintained easily. The birth had been complicated, Jiwoo arriving 3 weeks early, Sumin enduring 20 hours of labor. But when the doctor finally placed that tiny, screaming bundle in her arms, Sumin had felt something fundamental shift. This was real in a way nothing else had been. Not the restaurant, not the organization, not even the love she felt for Minjun. This child was consequence and responsibility and hope condensed into a fragile, perfect package. You're going to have such a normal life, she'd whispered to newborn Jiwoo in those first exhausted hours. So beautifully, boringly normal. No danger, no violence, no secrets. Just love and safety and the chance to be whoever you want. Minjun had wept hearing her promise their daughter a life they'd never had themselves. Now, 7 months later, they were building that promise into reality. The cafe was modest but successful, generating enough income to live comfortably without arousing suspicion. They'd bought a small house nearby, 2 bedrooms, a garden where Sumin grew vegetables and herbs, close enough to the ocean that they could hear waves at night. It was the opposite of Seoul's chaos, the antithesis of their former lives, and most mornings Sumin woke up grateful for exactly that. Most mornings. But not all. The nightmares came regularly. Sometimes she relived the firefight at the Silver Blades compound, saw Kwan's face as she pulled the trigger, heard the screams of people dying under her command. Sometimes it was her father, standing in the restaurant, asking why she'd joined the people who'd killed him. Other nights it was variations on danger. Jiwoo in harm's way, old enemies finding them, their cover being blown and everyone they loved paying the price. Minjun had his own demons. She'd wake to find him standing at the window, staring out at the peaceful street, his expression haunted. When she asked what he was thinking, he'd say, counting the bodies. Wondering if it was worth it. They saw a therapist, a necessity of their witness protection program, though they attended sessions separately to maintain cover. Slowly, painfully, they were learning to process trauma, to live with guilt, to accept that redemption wasn't a destination but a continuous practice. Jiwoo helped. The baby's needs were immediate and all-consuming, leaving little time for existential spiraling. Diapers and feedings and developmental milestones provided structure to days that might otherwise be overwhelmed by rumination. In caring for their daughter, they found purpose beyond mere survival. The cafe's other regular customers had become something like friends, though always at arm's length. Mrs. Park, who ran the nearby bookshop and stopped by every morning for tea. Young Jun, a university student studying tourism who came to work on his laptop most afternoons. Father Kim, the Catholic priest whose church was 3 blocks away, who'd befriended them despite their polite resistance to attending services. You don't have to be religious to be welcome, he'd said kindly one day, recognizing their discomfort. Just human. And even the most burdened souls deserve community. Sumin had nearly cried at that, the casual grace of someone offering acceptance without demanding confession. They didn't attend his church, but she appreciated knowing the option existed. The first anniversary of their arrival in Jeju came and went quietly. They'd survived a full year without being found, without incident, slowly becoming the people their false identities claimed them to be. The money Minjun had hidden before their testimony, carefully laundered and impossible to trace, had been used sparingly to supplement the cafe's income and ensure Jiwoo wanted for nothing. They weren't wealthy but they were secure. After years of chaos, security felt like luxury. But the past had long fingers and soul while distant wasn't unreachable. The first hint of trouble came via an encrypted email to an account Minjun had maintained for emergency contact. The sender was Choi, his former second-in-command, who'd managed to avoid serious prosecution and had rebuilt a smaller, quieter version of the Crimson Dragons. Phantom, I know you're alive somewhere. Just wanted you to know that most people have moved on. The organization exists, but it's different. Less violent, more business-focused. Your testimony forced changes that maybe were necessary. No hard feelings. Well, some hard feelings but also respect. Hope you're happy wherever you are. See. Minjun stared at the message for a long time before showing Sumin. They discussed whether to respond, ultimately deciding silence was safest. But knowing that forgiveness, or at least understanding, existed from some quarters loosened a knot of anxiety they'd both carried. Life continued its gentle rhythm. Jiwoo grew, starting to smile and coo, her personality emerging. She was serious like her father but had Sumin's determination, already fighting sleep when she wanted to stay alert, already expressing preferences about which toys she'd tolerate. They celebrated her 6-month birthday with a cake from the island's best bakery, just the three of them in their small house, and Sumin felt her heart nearly burst with ordinary happiness. This is what I wanted, she said to Minjun that night, Jiwoo asleep between them in bed despite all expert advice about co-sleeping. Not in the beginning but eventually. Just this. Just us. Just normal. You had to become a gangster to find normal, Minjun mused. That's very you. She laughed, the sound free and genuine. I guess some people take direct routes to happiness. I took the scenic route through Seoul's criminal underworld. How's the view? Better from here, she said, kissing him softly. Much better from here. The second warning came 8 months into their Jeju life, this time through more official channels. Prosecutor Kim called the emergency number they'd been given, her voice tense. We've had inquiries. Someone's been asking questions about your case, trying to find records, fishing for information about where you went. We've stonewalled, but they're persistent. Who? Minjun demanded. Don't know yet. Could be investigative journalist, could be someone from your past. We're trying to trace it. Meanwhile, increase your security awareness. Vary your routines. Be ready to move if necessary. The call ended, and Sumin and Minjun looked at each other with shared understanding. Paradise was temporary. They'd been lucky to have even this much peace. For a week, they operated with heightened caution. Minjun installed extra locks, purchased a legal firearm with their false credentials, planned escape routes from both the house and cafe. Sumin found herself watching customers more carefully, noting unfamiliar faces, the old paranoia from Seoul reasserting itself. But nothing happened. Days became weeks and the threat, if it had been genuine, seemed to dissipate. Eventually they relaxed again, though never quite to the level of casual comfort they'd briefly achieved. Maybe we'll always be looking over our shoulders, Sumin said one night. Maybe, Minjun agreed. But at least we're looking over our shoulders at the ocean instead of at back alleys. That's something. It was something. And as they learned, it had to be enough. The future they'd built was imperfect, shadowed by past, secured through betrayal, maintained through constant vigilance. But it was also real. The love between them was real. Jiwoo's existence was real. The life they'd created on Jeju, while built on false foundations, had grown authentic through daily practice. Sumin had wanted just work, just honest labor to support her family. Instead, she'd found a descent into criminality, a love affair with a mafia boss, violence she'd participated in and deaths she couldn't undo. She'd become a killer, a strategist, someone who'd betrayed an entire criminal empire to save herself and the man she loved. And yet, somehow she'd also found redemption. Not complete, not pure, but real enough to build a life upon. On Jiwoo's first birthday, they threw a small party at the cafe. Mrs. Park and Youngjun attended, along with Father Kim and a few other regulars who'd become friendly acquaintances. They sang, ate cake, and watched Jiwoo smash frosting into her face with joyful enthusiasm. For those few hours, they were just another young family celebrating a milestone, indistinguishable from thousands of others across Korea. After everyone left and Jiwoo was asleep, Sumin and Minjun stood on their back porch, looking out at the ocean visible in the distance, stars beginning to emerge as dusk settled. Do you think we made the right choices? She asked, not for the first time. I think we made the only choices we could, Minjun replied. And we're still here. Still together. Still trying. That has to count for something. It counts for everything, Sumin said, leaning into him. This life we've built, it's not what I imagined but it's ours. And I wouldn't trade it. Not even for a simpler past? One where you never sat at my table? She thought about it honestly. No. Because that past doesn't lead to this moment, to Jiwoo, to us standing here having survived everything. The path was dark, but the destination, this is worth it. He kissed the top of her head, and they stood in comfortable silence as night fully descended. Behind them, their daughter slept peacefully, dreaming whatever babies dream. Ahead, an uncertain future waited, carrying both promise and potential danger. But for this moment they had peace. The story of how a server sat at a mafia boss's table and ended up transforming both their lives had reached something like resolution. Not Hollywood ending, not fairy tale closure. Just two people who'd found each other in unlikely circumstances, made terrible and necessary choices, paid steep prices, and somehow emerged on the other side still capable of love and hope. In the morning the cafe would open again. Customers would come for coffee and pastries. Minjun would watch Jiwoo while Sumin worked the counter. They'd live another day of their carefully constructed normalcy, always aware of how fragile it was, always grateful for its existence. And maybe, eventually they'd stop looking over their shoulders quite so frequently. Maybe the nightmares would fade. Maybe the guilt would transform into wisdom, and the violence of their past would teach them to cherish the peace of their present. Maybe was a powerful word. It suggested possibility without guaranteeing outcome. And for people who'd lived in certainty, certain danger, certain death, certain corruption, maybe was a gift. As the last light faded from the sky and the stars multiplied overhead, Sumin whispered a promise to the universe, to her daughter, to herself. We will be better than what we were. We will love harder than we fought. We will build more than we destroyed. It was aspiration rather than achievement. But after everything, aspiration was enough. The story that had begun with a spilled sauce and a dangerous glance had evolved into something neither protagonist could have predicted. A family, a future, a chance at ordinary happiness earned through extraordinary struggle. She just wanted to work. Instead, she'd found war, love, betrayal, redemption, and ultimately peace. The journey had nearly destroyed them both. But they'd survived. Together. And on a quiet island far from Seoul's shadows, that survival transformed daily into something that looked surprisingly like life. Imperfect, hard-won, precious life. The Phantom and the server had become Minho and Soo-jin, parents to Jiwoo, owners of Fresh Start Cafe, residents of a small coastal town where their biggest concerns were inventory management and their daughter's sleep schedule. It was the most beautiful disguise they'd ever worn. And unlike their false names and fabricated histories, this one felt increasingly real. So there it is, the story of a woman who just wanted honest work and ended up sitting at a mafia boss's table, her life forever changed by that single moment. From server to strategist, from innocent to complicit, from Seoul's underworld to Jeju's peaceful shores, Sumin's journey shows how quickly life can transform when fate intersects with choice. Was it worth it? That's for you to decide. But sometimes, the most unexpected paths lead to the destinations we didn't know we needed. If you enjoyed this story, hit that like button and subscribe for more thrilling narratives. And drop a comment. What choice would you have made in Sumin's position? When survival and morality clash, where do you draw the line? Until next time, remember, everyone's just trying to survive, but how we choose to survive defines who we become. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.